Welcome to the We Hack Purple podcast, where each episode we meet a new person who works in information security, but ideally someone who helps to secure software as part of their work. This episode is sponsored by the Diana Initiative. They are an amazing conference that focuses on getting people from underrepresented groups to start working in information security. We want more of you, and that means every single person, to join our field. And this is what they do with their conference, which is August 7th in Las Vegas, Nevada, United States, also known as Vegas. And it happens just before DEF CON and Black Hat. So if you're going down there anyway, you could go one day early and attend this amazing, amazing, amazing event. But you're not here to hear about our sponsor usually. You're here to hear about our guest. And our guest this week is Gagandeep Singh, and he's awesome. I was like reading his stuff and reading his blog on the internet, and I thought, okay, so maybe if I invite him on the show, he'll say yes. The worst he could do is say no. And I asked him and he said yes. Will you tell our audience a little bit more about you?
Yep. Thanks, Tanya, for having me and sharing my experience here. About me, this is Gagandeep, and I have 11 years of IT experience. And I started working as a developer. And very soon in my career, I realized the importance of writing secure code and building secure products. So I started practicing for writing secure code, and from there my interest in security grew, and I do security testing as my key skill. And I did perform vulnerability assessments, code review, pen test, offensive security at different stages of my career. Now I am working more on defensive side and application security side. So I perform threat modeling, design review, and DevSecOps, and helping developers with their security needs.
Awesome. So the main reason that I was like, I have to talk to him was, so I'm writing my next book, which is called Alice and Bob Learn Secure Coding. And there is a section where I wanted to talk about domain driven development and how, so it's sort of like a fancier, newer, more organized way to write software. And it has all these awesome security benefits. So then when I was looking up all of the stuff, I just kept finding you. So I was like, so I felt like you had a blog post that to me explained it in the most clear way. You went over like a lot of the reasons why it's good. And so I was hoping, can we talk, first of all, could you like just give sort of an overview of what the heck is design driven development?
Before we get into domain-driven design, I would like to share that when a software is built, the teams mostly focus on just to make things work, and that is the main goal of the development teams. And when developing a product, the quality assurance, time to market, and cost is the more driving principle. And when security vulnerabilities are identified, so we follow more reactive approach in remediating them. But with domain-driven design, the bar is a little bit higher with regards to most software development. And domain-driven design does not just focus on how the system should work, but having a deeper understanding of what we are building. And there is a significant emphasis on understanding the problem domain and what we are building rather than just focusing on the solutions. And with domain-driven design, we take active decisions throughout the different phases of the development lifecycle. And eventually the focus is on the design, which is zeroed down to from the code to the architecture level so that the end solution is more secure.
Part of the thing that I liked about it when I had put on the internet, like, I'm thinking of covering these things, and someone said, you should cover domain driven design and development. And I was like, oh, I actually hadn't heard of this before. And then when I was reading about it, the idea of, naming things and organizing things based on what the product is about. So let's say it builds cars, like having like the car object or whatever and all the things inside of it. The idea is to make it really readable. and easily understandable. And I feel from a security perspective, sometimes we come in and we look at an app and we're like, what is this thing supposed to do? Oh my gosh. And with domain-driven design, it makes so much more sense, like right out of the box from the first time you look at it. It's like, oh, this does this and this does that. Thanks, guys. But you were, so in your blog article and we've discussed, just what are some of the security advantages that might happen?
For a domain-driven design and understanding the security advantages, I will take a step back and highlight the issues which we are facing right now in our traditional approach. So when the developers are asked to build a product and there is a security vulnerability, so during development they have to have an explicit knowledge about security vulnerabilities, and their focus is on vulnerabilities, and rather than solving the business problem and building on business functionality. And with that, developers need to have good knowledge about security, and and we consider them to be a security expert also, along with a developer. With domain-driven design, the organization, the where the organizations are now focusing more on is to, with the shift left approach, we can incorporate security as early as in the development lifecycle, which will make the development lifecycle more effortless, and security is integrated into it. So to explain the advantages, I will use an example. For example, we have a simple application which has, we are using it for uploading images. And so for that application, we will need a login page, and the login page eventually becomes a feature of an application.
Yeah.
But as an end user, I would like my images on the application be more confidential, and it is not going in an unauthorized hand. So I wanted my images to be more confidential. So eventually, security, it is the concern of a user. So eventually it becomes a security concern with domain-driven design, not just a feature. So eventually, if we think about, when we are building an application, we should not just focus on security features. We should take security as a concern of an end user, like in this case, confidentiality. And a login mechanism gives confidentiality in an application. And understanding that security concerns, we will say that the CIA is the main concern of security, basically. So the four pillars of domain-driven design is confidentiality, integrity, availability, and traceability. And those things are eventually integrated into the life cycle, and once the user stories are defined on those principles, this will eventually lead to lesser security vulnerabilities and having the positive impact in the development life cycle.
Yeah, I feel like having security be a part of the feature itself, like built in from the beginning rather than being added on later, like that sounds great. I remember you were saying, so for instance, if we have a file upload feature, we would want to create a secure file upload feature, and security is outlined in what the feature does. Like that it's part of the description of what will be performed. So it's not, we're doing a file upload and we're smashing a security control on top of it. It's that the feature that we are offering to our users is to securely upload files. And this is how we accomplish that whole thing. And a bunch of the things in it are security. Does that make sense?
Yes. Eventually, if we are building a good design and taking all the things into consideration, then this becomes a natural process rather than, I would say, an interest of that, and we need an expert for it. Defining the user stories in a more structured way will eventually has a natural um, benefits to the development life cycle. So, yeah.
Okay, so one of the things when I was reading up on domain driven development was called trusted types. And so I went to go see a talk in September of 2022 in Vienna at this conference called Sec for Dev. And there's this guy who gave a talk. His name's Michael, Michael Koopman. And he talked about, so content security policy header is growing and growing and growing. It does more and more stuff. And so there was a guy named Lucas that works at Google, and he talked about that. But then Michael talked about specifically part of it with trusted types is a way that we could enforce the domain-driven development. So you implement a CSP, and one of the things you would say is these are specific trusted types, and you can only use these types. So instead of having, let's say, you have an object and it collects an email address, but it's not a validated email address. It's just something we got from the user. We don't know if this is good or not. And then rather than us running it through a validation function or of some sort, we pass it to another object that's called validated email address. And then what it does is it validates it, and then it returns either the email address or false because it's not validated, right? And it throws an error and it says to the original email address thing, hey, go out and get that email address again because it's no good. And so from then on in all the rest of your application, you just access the validated email address. And so this solves the problem of, I'm sure you've seen this before, where a developer takes something from the user, and there is a validation feature somewhere in the app, but sometimes they use it first to make a business decision. They take the user input from the user and make a business decision before they validated it, or they forgot to do the input validation like just this one time, and then it gets used somewhere to make a business decision like, something we should send to the SQL server or something like that, and then disaster ensues. So with domain-driven development, if we're planning these domains and we're using trusted types, CSP can say, we don't use the email address, we only use validated email address type from now on. And so that means you can't put that to the screen, or you can't do these other things with it, and CSP helps. So while you're coding, it may seem annoying where it's like, you can't use that. And I'm like, why? And it's like, because it's the email address, not the validated email address, Tanya. That's the one you're supposed to use. I'm like, oh, CSP, you're right. And so that was one of the ways that was suggested that we would be able to kind of force some of the domain-driven development. Because so the idea of domain-driven development is awesome, but enforcing it seems like it can be complex. Did you want to add any other things on that?
Yes, I would like to add one more feature about a key principle about domain-driven design, failing fast, as you were saying that validating the email address. And so when a user input is ingested into an application, so based on the user input, we validate it, and like based on what the design, the contract of design says. And if the email address, for example, is invalid, so that request, before it is processed by the method, the request is discarded. So it eventually helps in sanitizing of the input, and only correct structure of input is only ingested into the application. So yeah, this is one of the key principle of domain-driven design. Uh, and apart from that, I would say validation is always a very critical aspect of all the applications. And if the user input is not validated properly, it can lead into various types of attacks like cross-site scripting or code injection, and it's an attacker's playground to exploit and to the level of extent they want to go. And I would say that when interacting with developers, validation is not properly understood. And with domain-driven design, we have, like with this particular concept, uh, we can define at various stages where we can validate a user input. And ideally, there are at 5 stages we can validate a user input to ensure that no malicious input is ingested into the application.
Mhm.
So the first one is to check the origin from where the data is coming, then the size of the user input, and uh, the context of the context of the user input, and we can do it through regex or uh, other ways, other open source libraries for it, and the syntax which is there in the user input, and eventually semantics of the user input to ensure that all the user input is it makes sense for an application to process it. So if we implement validation at these levels,
Mhm.
then I would say a very high number, I would say 90% of security issues are resolved if we are validating user input properly.
Literally, that is the exact question I was going to ask you. How many security problems would just be eliminated if we all did perfect input validation? Yes. So if everyone could just listen to what he said, especially every software developer on the planet, just follow his advice, I'd appreciate it. Because seriously, you and I, we wouldn't need jobs, or we would need to get other jobs, because everything would be, no, it'd be so much better if input validation and proper hardening and keeping up with patches, the world would be a very secure place.
True, I totally agree.
So true. And I think domain driven development and actually, I have one more question. I mean, I have 1,000 questions, but I want to respect your
Okay.
time. So, domain driven design and domain driven development, are those kind of the same thing, or are they sort of different?
Um, Basically, it's the design. I would say, I will explain you in terms of SDLC. So before we actually develop anything, we design it, and uh, and the term they are, I would say, one and the same thing, and it is used at different stages. So when we are designing a solution, then that what we mean is to model basically an application and a problem statement, and where uh, I would say a so it a modeling requires collaboration between domain and software practitioners, where the requirements are being fetched and understood and then written into user stories, and based once we understand what we need to build, then we design our solution, and eventually that leads to development. So having a strong design will will make sure that the development is more secure and well understood by the developers when they are writing code. So I would say there is a definite I would say mapping between them,
Mhm.
and they then go in sync together.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a super sensitive question. So when I was a software developer, I was never handed a good design doc. They'd be like, "It's going to do this stuff. Good luck, Janka." I never got like, you know, this is the domain it's in. These are the objects we want. This is that. I never ever received something like that when I was a developer. Is this something that is this something that's in wide practice? Is this something that like organizations could implement? Like, how could we take advantage of this cool methodology?
Uh, yes, I would say that this is a very advanced, I would say, principle. And through, if we follow and if we understand domain-driven design, then developing a very complex solution will eventually become very easy for us to implement. And for that, we have to understand the building blocks of domain-driven design.
Mhm.
And I will go them like on a high level on the building blocks. So the first is entities. So what are entities? Entities are, I would say, a primary key or a key identity of an individual or a product, which is consistent towards in the entire life cycle. And we should emphasize that once we are defining an entity, it should be always consistent and they're and well coordinated throughout the life cycle, which will make sure that we can control the behavior of an object in an application, and then it will help us in resolving a lot of security issues later in the phase.
I feel, oh, sorry, please.
Yeah, sorry.
I feel like if we could hand to a software developer or a team of software developers an entire design modeled upon this methodology, I feel like it would be a dream as a dev. It's like, oh, I know, like I just like fill in the blanks. All right, I got this. Like, have you ever had a chance to work with this where you got to get feedback from the developers as to if they liked having this level of guidance?
I would say that I have not so far able to get a pitch in this idea for most of our customers, because it is still relatively new for people to understand and start implementing.
Okay.
But it is, I would say, it is a very powerful principle, and it should be. And through this, I would like people to be aware and adopt this new methodology in which we can eventually build more secure products, and eventually, if reading through code will make sense for the people in the longer run, and the maintainability of our solution will be very beneficial. It will be having a very benefit of it will be very beneficial for us.
No, I agree completely. I mean, like when I was a software developer, the design doc would be like, it's going to do this stuff. Good luck with that. And the idea of being past something that's so organized and just being able to look over, because I remember being a dev and like talking about the things and saying like, yo, this is like, this won't work because of this, or this can work because of that, and offering feedback on designs, but actually getting one that was good and getting to work with it, I think it might speed up the entire development process because they have clear guidance for the first time. And from a security perspective, being able to just look at the design and having literally the words explain what it does, that sounds fantastic. Okay, so we are coming to the end of our time. And so I'm going to ask the thing I always ask. If people want more of you, where could they perhaps follow you on social media? Or maybe you might have a blog that they might want to read?
Yes, I have a blog which is we can share with this platform, and people who are interested in understanding and deep diving in deep with me, I will be very happy to collaborate with them. And I'm active on LinkedIn, and I can share the link with you, and will be like happy to connect with people who have similar interest.
That would be awesome. So if you are listening or watching, so if you're watching, you're on YouTube, you just go down the page and there will be links to all of the things that we talked about so that you can follow him and you can read his blog. If you are listening, it's audio only. If you, chances are you're on a podcast episode. If you go to the show notes, you should be able to see this link. But some of the podcast platforms don't allow that. So for you folks, I would say that you should cruise on over to wehackpurple.com/podcast. And then you will see this gentleman's face and hear his voice and go to his page. So this, I believe, is going to be number 68, podcast episode 68. And so just scroll down, we have a whole bunch, and you will find this one, and it will say design-driven development. I want to thank our sponsor one more time, the Diana Initiative. This is a conference that is focused specifically on helping people from underrepresented groups get into information security, so working in our field. Their event is held August 7th in Las Vegas in the United States. It's going to be hot there. It's going to be very warm. Their tickets are super reasonably priced compared to basically everything else that ever happens in Las Vegas. There's going to be tons of friendly faces, including mine. We Hack Purple is a proud sponsor of the Diana Initiative, and I'm looking forward to seeing lots of you there. But now that I've thanked my sponsor, I want to say thank you to my guest. I really appreciate you being on our podcast, and I know that it's not like you do 100 podcasts all the time, so I appreciate you taking a chance on We Hack Purple.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya, for having me and giving me the opportunity to express on this.
Awesome. Okay, bye everyone.